Hello elephants and welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to be going over Blockbench and some of the best practices when modeling specifically for Hytale. So I just want to reiterate, this is not a Blockbench tutorial. I will not be teaching you how to model. I'm instead going to go over some of the best practices and things that you should be keeping in mind when modeling for Hytale. So with that said, we can get started. I'm assuming you have Blockbench installed, and the very first thing that I recommend that you do is install the Hytale Models plugin. So you can search for Hytale over here and available. And it's called Hytale Models. It's made by Janice, X11, and Kano. And just make sure that you have this installed. So having this extension will already enforce a lot of the things that you have to keep in mind when modeling for Hytale, and it will also add support for their engine. So eventually when you export whatever your models are, with .blocky model and blocky anim, it will work directly with the Hytale engine. So make sure that you have this installed. Now, the second thing to keep in mind is the type of model that we're making. So depending on if we're making a character attachment, some tools, weapons, armor, clothing, maybe a food item, we would be wanting to use a Hytale character. So Hytale characters are 64 by 64. And then if we go back to the menu, a Hytale prop instead is kind of like a block, furniture, or things that get placed physically in the world. So if we click on this, we can see that these ones are 32 by 32 instead. So just make sure that you know the thing that you're modeling, because depending on what it is which of these two you'll be wanting to pick. In this case, I'm actually going to be loading some of the official Hytale examples, so I can go over some of the best practices and tips that they mention in their blog post. Okay, so I thought I'd show everyone how to download them, how to download the examples for yourself. In case you're interested, you can go to hytale.com, then go to the blog, and then find this one, an introduction to making models for Hytale. If you scroll all the way down, you'll find this download here. And if you click this button, you'll be able to download a small selections of models that they've provided for us. So this is where you find that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and imported the models provided by Hytale, which I'll be using for examples as we go ahead with the guidelines. Okay, so the first guideline, and technically more of a constraint when modeling for Hytale, is the type of geometry that we can use on our models. The Hytale engine limits us to two specific types of geometry, which are actually enforced by the Hytale extension, which is why I say that you should download this. The first type of geometry is the cube, and the second one is a quad. So if we add a cube, it's very small, it's down here. We can see this creature is very big, but there we go. That's our cube. So when modeling, you have to use a cube, or you have to use a quad, which is a plane. So yeah, just those two. You can't use any other type of geometry when making your models. The second one, which is technically also a little bit of a restriction, has to do with our triangle count. So when we're making models, any 3D software, our geometry is made up of vertices, which are the corners of the geometry, and then triangles. Usually a quad, in this case a plane or one of the faces of the square, is made out of two triangles. So you can picture this being broken in two. So if we were to break this right down the middle, just this particular face, this would be two. This phase would have two more, and all the way till we have our total. But every 3D model will be made out of triangles, and Hytale enforces specific numbers for the number of triangles that your models can have. So we can have textures that will be used everywhere. These are things like leaves, in which case they are asking us to limit the number of triangles to around 8. For more common things, so maybe ferns or branches, or maybe some mushrooms, or like small vegetation that will be here and there, they're asking us to keep the models from 0 to around 50 triangles. For things that are more rare, that there won't be too many in the world, say things like chest or furniture or a statue or any other like world decoration, you can go to around 400 triangles and try to keep it less than that. And then for epic things like bosses or NPCs, then you're free to kind of go a little bit more crazy. They're essentially saying anywhere from like 400 and above, even 1,000. So you might be wondering, how do you check this on Blockbench? And for that, you can select your model And once everything is selected, you can click here, 49 out of 49, and you'll get a little bit of model statistics. So you'll see the vertex count as well as the faces and the number of cubes that you're using. In this case, what we care about is the faces. A face is made out of 2 triangles. So if we multiply the faces number by 2, we'll get the triangle count for this one. Okay, another restriction that I believe the Hytale extension also enforces on us is the size of the texture and the quantity of textures. So when we're modeling for Hytale, each model, so that is the entire creature or whatever item we're modeling, is limited to 1 texture per model. So over here we can see we should be able to add more textures usually. But in this situation, we are stuck with only 1 texture, and the size of that texture needs to be a multiple of 32. It doesn't need to be a square necessarily, as we can see with the Golem Fire Steel, but the individual dimensions of the texture need to be a multiple of 32. We can see that's the case for every texture. So this one's 64 times 32, and the chest is 128 by 96. So we can see that every single dimension is divisible by 32, and this is mandatory. Similarly, we can see that every model is tied to 1 and only 1 texture. So don't try to subdivide your model to use multiple textures, as the Hytale engine does not support that. Okay, so now we can start more with the actual guidelines and things to keep in mind. Tips and tricks, I guess. The first one they go over is the idea of baking details into the texture. So that is sometimes like you'll feel like you want to add more variety to your model, or more like shape via the actual modeling. But what they recommend is that you do so using the texture instead. So in this scenario, for example, if we look at this corner, it almost looks like this section here is cut out. And that could definitely be modeled in by using, more geometry, no? So we could add more squares and make this shape differently. But instead, what Thomas has done here, Thomas is the artist, is he's textured in the crevice or the break of the texture instead. So we can see this is still a cube, but when we look at it, it looks like it's been chipped off. Similarly, we can see that there's highlights and a lot of shading. So like this is very bright, and that's baked directly into the texture. Similar with the highlights here, or at the very tip of the spikes. So we can see that there's like a highlight in all of these. And so all this detail is baked directly into the texture, which is something that you should try yourself when you're modeling. So for example, here, the light, you can see there's a little bit of reflection that's red. Or same here from inside the mouth, since this is bright, we can see that there's a gradient of red coming in, going out into the natural metal color. So all of these details are baked directly into the texture. Another example for the shading and how it's kind of baked into the texture. So in this case, if we select the lid and we rotate it open, we can see that the chest is not actually hollow inside, but instead they've painted in the hollowness with a darker color. So this is another example of the texture showing the volume and being used to give more details to a model instead of doing it with the geometry itself. So just things to keep in mind. Try to add detail not via the geometry itself, but instead via the texturing of your asset. Now, when color picking, how do we color pick when modeling for Hytale? So for this one, I would recommend straight up color picking from the Hytale world itself. So we can preview scene here. We can go Hytale. They got this one. So when the game comes out, you'll have access to all these different blocks in game, right? And all these different models and whatnot. So what I recommend is that if you're using, if you're doing a wooden door, let's say, don't be scared to open the wooden chest or take screenshots of it or grab the texture for it and then just color pick directly from it. If you're painting your texture, have the color picker and just pick the colors that you like. So try color picking directly from the game, and this way you can kind of guarantee that your texture will fit within the world. Okay, so for this next one, I've come up with an example, but essentially the difference is in texture quality. So Hytale is very much in between 2 separate opposites. Let's start by seeing the Hytale model. So this is the Hytale model, okay? I just kind of look at it. On one side, we got the pixelated version. So if we switch, we can see that this is a lot more textured. This looks kind of like an older video game, I guess. Like you can see it's not as shaded, like the transitions are not as smooth. So here we can see kind of like the color transitions are a little bit smoother, while in this version it's just kind of like a little bit harder on the texture. Hytale is a little bit less pixelated on the look, like it's a little bit more hand painted, but at the same time, Hytale is not exactly super hand painted or blurry. So if we go to this image instead, we can see that this one's a little too blurry. So I switch between them, you can tell the difference. But that's the idea. Like you don't want to go either too blurry or too pixelated. It's like you gotta try to find that hard balance right in between those two. And that's where the art style of Hytale sits. Okay, so this next tip has to do with stretching and some limitations that they recommend that you stick to. So when you are selecting an object here in Blockbench, there's this option here called stretch, which you can see on the transform. So if we increase this, you'll notice the object starts stretching. But what happens, however, is that the pixel size grows with it. So if you notice now, this pixel here is way bigger than the pixels on the rest of the chest. So when you import this in game, this will be the case too. So they are asking us to essentially limit the stretch values that we use between 0.7 and 1.3. So this way, even though the pixels do grow a little bit, they're kind of okay with that. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your art. You're free to do whatever you feel like for your models. But this is an official recommendation by the Hytale team. Okay, and the tip that I have for you guys is to keep things kind of chunky and cartoony. So Hytale is not necessarily realistic. And I'll show this image from the blog post itself. But right here, I have another example for you. So on the left, we can see the actual Hytale chest. And we can see that it's got some funky proportions. Like it's kind of like it's fun, you know. It's got a smaller bottom half. It kind of grows on the top. The lock like comes out quite a bit. There's a like it's got an interesting shape, and it's not necessarily realistic. Right here on the right side, instead, I've tried to model with the same textures a chest that might be a little bit more realistic per se. So we have a box. It's the same size up and down, and then the metal bar is very thin around it, and the log is also a lot smaller and like closer to the center. And you can see that even though it's a little bit more realistic, it doesn't quite as well fit the Hytale art style. So that's something to keep in mind when you're modeling things, that don't necessarily try to be realistic and precise with them. Have fun, try things, make it cartoony, maybe make it chunky, bulky. Lastly, the very last tip I want to go over is the different shading modes for the objects in Hytale. So when you select an object, if you go to instead of transform the element window up here, you'll see that there's this shading mode. And if you click that button, you'll get 4 different options. Right now, we actually don't know what one of them is, but the other 3 were disclosed in the blog post. And so they recommend the following. Use standard for blocks and things that are essentially not dynamic and not very like organic in their own movement. So like the chest would be standard. The pig you would not want to use standard with. Instead, for the pig, you would want to use flat. Because in-game flat removes some of the shadows underneath. Unfortunately, the different blending modes don't show in Blockbench, so don't worry about it looking the same if you start clicking through these. But know that when you import it into Hytale, it will make a difference. So this is where you select the shading mode. And lastly, we also have full bright, which in Blockbench it's shown as always lit. What this does, it will make the object glow at night, and it will also emit bloom. Yeah, and bloom, if you don't know, is essentially like a little bit of a glow around your object that gets applied in post-processing, usually video games. So that's everything there is to know for rendering and shading mode. So just keep in mind that when you're making your object as well, make sure that you apply the correct shading type. Very last tip that I noticed I forgot about is well, technically it's two of them, but the first one is don't use white. Apparently the Hytale engine does not deal with the color white very properly, so use colors that are close to white. So if we like check, this is not exactly white, so just stay away from full white, as apparently the engine does not support it properly. And the second thing to keep in mind is it's possible to use like transparency. So in this case, if we go to like the erase, you can erase a couple pixels, and then this would be transparent in your texture. No, this is more if you're making a window or whatnot. As of now, the Hytale engine does not support like half transparency. So it's either full transparency or none. So just something to keep in mind when you're texturing. Make sure that it's either one of those two. In the future, they've mentioned that they want to support different transparencies as well. So that's something to look forward to in the future. Okay, so one last thing I want to mention is some resources for you to learn more if you're curious or interested. And one of them is definitely the official like Hytale website. So if you go to the same blog I recommended at the start of the video for downloading the models, this model covers absolutely everything that we went through today, as well as extra stuff. There's 2 videos, around 2 hours of content made by the lead artist in Hytale. So definitely check these out. Great stuff. And then additionally, I recommend that you check the Hytale Discord. So you can click here. Yeah, if you want any more information, there's channels for Blockbench and modeling, and the community is so nice, and they will help you out, no problem. So don't be scared to say hi, try his stuff out, and have fun.